What's going on, everyone? You're watching Ash on Comics. My name is Ash, and here's today's comic, Powers of X, issue 6 of 6. Now, this is also part 12 of a really complex, super crunchy, as I like to call it, storyline written by Jonathan Hickman. Chances are, if you're watching this, you've already read Powers of X. I would really hope so. I really hope you read this whole thing. I'm sure most people watching these, don't. This is not. If any comic you're gonna read to not have spoiled for you, this is the one. People told me about Jonathan Hickman when this was coming down the pipe, and I was a big naysayer about the X-Men. Not because I dislike X-Men. I'm actually a huge X-Men fan. X-Men's what got me into comics. It's my favorite comic of all time. I'm a naysayer about X-Men because over the past 20 years, I've just hated what they've become. They're not recognizable to me. I feel like X-Men, the way most, you see so many people feel about the new Disney Star Wars films. That's how I feel about X-Men. So I just stay away. I'm just like, God, stay away. And then the past 2 years, Marvel has been just shitting the bed. First they did the rainbow colored X-Men, the X-Men blue, X-Men yellow, X-Men red, X-Men black. And that was just a disaster. It was terrible. I know there's a few people that claim they liked it and how good, but it was bad. And then they said, fans, we hear ya. We hear ya. We're here to listen to you, and backed by popular demand, we're bringing Uncanny X-Men back. And the fans cheered, and they were like, oh, yay, we finally get our old Uncanny X-Men, which we always loved, and we never understood why you canceled. Well, 6 months after that, 6 months after Uncanny X-Men launched, they announced it was being canceled. But not only did they announce that it was being canceled, they had the cojones, which means balls. Actually, I think it means eggs. Whatever, it really means balls. And they had the cojones to tell the fandom. And by the way, we knew about this a year before we launched Uncanny X-Men, that we were going to do this. We knew that we were bringing Jonathan Hickman on and we were going to reboot it. So they scammed everybody. And when I heard that, I was like, I'm not touching this new X-Men with a 10-foot pole. This is stupid. I was so mad. I was like, and I was telling people, why are you going to buy this? Look at, but Jonathan Hickman, Ash. Jonathan Hickman, man. Jonathan Hickman. And I was like, I don't care if Claremont himself was coming back and Jim Lee was doing the art. Marvel doesn't care about the fans. They just care about scamming you for money. Then I started listening to some of the things that Hickman was saying, interviews and so forth. And I was like, I really like what Hickman's saying. I really like his ideas. I like his intentions. I like his desire to tell a good X-Men story. But I still couldn't get past that block of Marvel getting in the way. It's the same problem that, Warner Brothers has with their DC Extended Universe films. When they let Patty Jenkins just go do her Wonder Woman movie and they just left her alone, she made gold. When they pretty much stayed out of James Wan's hair and let him do his Aquaman film, they got gold. But when they sit there and they diddle their finger in the pot and, told Zack Snyder how to do this, how to do that, and screwed everything up. This is why, we're losing stars left and right. We lost Ben Affleck, lost Henry Cavill, what was the Jared Leto from Joker, although I think he kind of does want to do, but so many people have walked away. They're just like, this Warner Brothers they just can't get out of their own way. I feel like Marvel's kind of that way. I'm just like, but I've told in my previous videos why I decided to pick up this book. I figured, you know what, just to satisfy my curiosity, I do love X-Men. I saw an issue sitting on the counter when it was sold out. There's like a counter that kind of runs parallel to the new shelf at my comic book store. And what happens is when my store opens, there's a mad rush of like all the people that like have to be there and they get other books and then they buy it, and then there's a lull for like the next hour after the store opens. And so it was like everyone got their books. I showed up as these guys were all paying and stuff, and then there was this dead quiet time, and there was one House of X book just sitting on the glass counter where they have some toys and back issues and stuff, and it was just off to the side, and there was no one around, and I was like, well, it's no one's book. And I was like, it's almost like something called to me. And I picked it up, and I walked, I got my books, and I told the nice ladies at the store, I was like, hey, can you put this in my pull box, and maybe I'll pick it up next week, because I wasn't sure I was going to get it. But I was like, I can't just let this go. It's like, if anything is a hot commodity, it sold out in minutes. And my pal Jimmy over at Comic Quirks, he gave me the code for the book to get digitally. So I read it. And I was like, yeah, there's something here. And I did a review on every single issue. So if you want to know the details of how I thought, it's a really good breakdown to get my idea of just my takes and how I received the book. Not telling you how to receive the book, but how I did. And here we are today. I even though the first book and then Powers of X #1 were probably the weakest in the series, something told me to keep getting them. And then I read that third issue, which I think was House of X 2 or Powers of X. I can't remember what it was, but it was the revelatory issue where you found out about Moira McTaggart, the many lives of Moira McTaggart. And my head just was like, just wow. And I was hooked. I was like, all right, Hickman, sell me on a story. And each issue just kept getting better and better. And here we are today. So let's get on with this. It might be a long one. Hopefully not. I really tried to wrap my head around this book, because these are really hard books to talk about by yourself. I love watching some of my other YouTuber friends that do stuff, like Wes over at Thinking Critical. But he does a couple of things where he gets like a buddy on, and they talk about the book together. And I wish I had someone to do that with me, because it's difficult to wrap my head around what's going on and then stream a coherent thought to you that doesn't sound like just babbling. So we start off, and now we build Professor X. Then we get the typical 2-page splash. Over here, this little code that just says Powers of X in Krakoan. And we see Charles. Oh, he looks so happy, just walking through the woods. X0, the X-Men, year 1. So X0, just as a reminder, takes place 10 years prior to the present timeline. It's year 1, X1 is year 10, and that's where the current, like the present timeline thread runs. So here we see Charles, and we're back, if you remember, the very first issue, this carnival, and Charles is walking around and watching people and seeing everyone happy. He sees a park bench, and he goes and sits down, and look at little cutie Charles. You ever seen Charles looking so cute? It's like right out of a old-timey, I can't remember those names of those comics. Whatever. You're like, Ash, you just called Charles cute. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. And he's looking up, and he sees the birds, and he's looking the other direction. This is kind of weird. I was like, oh, that's a weird expression. And then this lady shows up. Good afternoon. And the same to you. Are you enjoying the fair? It seems like the kind of thing I should enjoy, and yet I look around at all these people and know it's just a show for those who need one. A distraction of what's really going on, if you will. Mind if I sit? Please. So, something's weird about the way the artist is drawing Charles' eyes here. He clearly, if you look at Moira, he can clearly draw eyes. So part of me is like, is this symbolic of something? Is this a hidden reference that's just being ever so subtle that we're not meant to catch until later on? I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too deep into things, but that's what these books do to you. I don't know if you heard my dog there deciding to shake off. So, this is all to say. I'm not going to really go over this. Moira talks about her experiences, and we get the scene where she confronts Charles after he says, I have this wonderful dream of a better world. And she says, here's the thing, it's not a dream if it's real. And then Charles, confused, I'm sorry, do we know one another? Oh yes, we go back quite a ways. Who are you? And then Charles gets his revolutionary, I just learned Kung Fu moment. That's a Matrix reference for those of you who are culturally challenged. And then we cut to X3, and this is where the book really kind of starts. The rest was just sort of a recap to remind you of what happened, and I believe to reiterate something. Like, whenever an artist, and I'm referring to both writers and pencilers in this term as artists, whenever artists repeat something, there's generally, unless they're just a shitty artist, they're generally doing it on purpose to reinforce something, to say, hey, this is important. Sometimes the importance is just to remind you on something that was easily forgotten. Other times, I believe this is actually the third time we've seen this scene. This is Hickman. I have to believe this is Hickman saying, this scene is a kingpin, if you will, or a linchpin, or the corner keystone, or whatever, of what I'm doing. This is one of the most important things in the story. And though you may not understand yet what you're seeing, it will become clear later, and I need you to remember this scene. That later on, when all gets expressed later down the road, and some revelations come down that explain more about what you're actually seeing in this scene, it's important that you remember the scene even existed so that those future scenes aren't confusing. I don't know if I'm being eloquent enough and I'm explaining that, but hopefully you understand. So we get this preserve, and I kind of called this a little bit from the beginning when we first saw this in the previous X books. This is X3 year 1000, and there was this sort of like the Garden of Eden thing. And I had theorized that, this world, what's going on here, this future is going to become sort of the building blocks of the present. And I was kind of right, but not in the same path that I was thinking. And here we see the librarian comes in, and it's kind of like Star Trek holodeck style here. This preserve is all fake. It's meant to be almost like a Matrix, if you will. Obviously you're not jacked in, but it's an illusion. And we see this bestial creature leap out to try to attack the librarian. He says, this aggression is pointless, for my augmented brain is far more advanced than yours. By the time your brain finished telling your muscle to move, I had already prepared countermeasures to ensure your failure. Do you have any idea how much faster you would have to be to actually touch me? Now, please, go eat your food. And it's very much reminiscent of a child testing their parents, and they're just like sulking over. I said, I mean you no harm. Now, some people have speculated that this character here is Charles Xavier. And I can see why you might think that. Number one, we don't get clear view of Charles without the mask very often. He does have sort of the eyebrows similar, the facial, the sharp angular features. But I don't think so. And the reason why I don't think so is I believe it is imperative that this character, this librarian, is not a mutant. So he continues, or actually a voice off the side continues. You understand it though, right? They just want to be free, not locked up here in this zoo. How can anyone want something they don't know exists? Wanting to be free would mean they are capable of accurately observing this manufactured environment, this system. We have to keep them enslaved. They don't want to be free. They don't know what free is. I think this is simply their nature. Nah, we see the voice as Wolverine. They want to be free. They know what it is. I make sure to fill their heads each day with stories of revolution, of the enslaved rising up to overthrow their masters. You'll see. Give it time. But you have no more time, Logan Howlett James. And I loved this scene so much. Wolverine is one of my favorite comic book characters ever. It's my favorite Marvel character. This is the guy. I mean, I started off as an X-Men fan when I was as a 13-year-old getting into comics. Even actually before that, I think I was about 9 years old. I picked up an earlier X-Men just somewhere off a spinner rack, and it was I believe it was issue 162 where Wolverine is getting changed into a brood, and that issue stuck with me for 3 to 4 more years until I eventually saw another comic books and I decided to start collecting them, and I bought X-Men. And Wolverine has always been the most fascinating character to me, and not because he's edgy and got claws and kills people, although as a young boy that's cool, definitely cool stuff, but the complexities of this character. As Chris Claremont would further develop him, and then when he wrote that miniseries with Frank Miller, and he wrote in these ideas of Wolverine battling the beast within, which is why he seeks Charles out to begin with, but then later on you learn that he studied the ways of the samurai to have Bushido sort of control his berserker rage, having the whole Weapon X storyline, that he was this covert agent, that he's lived for potentially 100 years or longer. He was around in World War II. We didn't know that until later on. There were always these deep complexities of Wolverine to be explored, and I've always also loved that even though he's kind of this broken figure and he's been this assassin and all this stuff, in his heart is a person who does want to do right. He just never had the foundations, so it's easy for him to do bad. Although he's never been a villain, he's always been very much a man of principle. And here, I got to see Wolverine being that guy that I love. And I've seen so many people since Claremont left just screw up the character and just make him this wild, crazy, just berserker combatant guy. And they think that's not what makes Wolverine cool at all to me. It's his principles and the fact that he's incorruptible. Is it incorruptible? Uncorruptible? He may not be a Superman figure, right? He's never going to be corrupted. He's got integrity to the max. And he's the Resistance right now. Humph. That's a neat trick, speaking English. I'm the librarian. Dead languages fascinate me, especially ones that haven't been spoken in centuries. I downloaded it some time ago and hope that one day we might have an honest conversation. A nuanced one, for I would not want to be mistaken. Well, what are you waiting for? Get on with it. I was waiting for her. And we see Moira emerge from the shadows. English? Yes. And here's the kind of the kicker here. Is this Charles or not? This thing where you see his mouth and his nose, I have to compare this to other frames where you see it just like this. It's a possibility. I just don't think so for other reasons. I think that might be a red herring. So Moira says, well, that's a problem. It means you've likely been listening to us for quite a while, haven't you? Eavesdropping. The librarian goes on to say, observation is important, blah, 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 blah. And he says, I wanted to see what makes you tick. And Wolverine's, how's that working out for you? Conclusions have yet to be drawn, but we're nearing them, one way or the other. You've done well surviving. Fortunately, you two have the same blood type, but still, the idea of it, a millennium of depending on one another to survive, it is impressive. So this has kind of got me. How are Wolverine and Moira alive for 1,000 years later? Okay, so we know the Wolverine's healing factor allows him to live a long time, but we also know with the Old Man Logan story is that he doesn't live that long. Now we do know that the X-Men have been able to sort of reincarnate themselves, like they can resurrect themselves with the technologies, but that's not being done here. Those things are gone. So also, Moira doesn't have Wolverine's, healing factors and things. So there's a question there that seems weird. And I think, Hickman's too much a stickler for details to just have slipped and been like, oops, I didn't notice that plot hole. So I think there's a reason that's just not being answered. Anyways, we move on. Unfortunately, it's likely that surviving is about to come to an end, for tomorrow is Ascension. The Phalanx will descend and absorb the entirety of our post-human society. All that we are, all that we have done, all that we have known will become one with the collective. Our lives as separate, sentient beings will be over, and we will exist as nothing more than self-aware intelligence in the great hive of the Phalanx. So, we kind of knew this was coming. We've seen the other issues about the observation, but here is where the librarian is talking, explaining to Wolverine and Moira about the Phalanx. And this is a key thing because of who Moira is. Then we Phalanx will begin our journey to the nearest black hole where our collective intellect will merge with a God intellect, a dominion. One that lives outside of space and time, and that was once our post-human society. And what was once our post-human society will exist forever as part of that Godhead. Wow, this is some pretty meta, metaphysical type philosophical ideas. This is something I have not seen since the Wachowskis started broaching this subject in their Matrix trilogy, where my mind was just like, oh my gosh, I don't believe any of this is real, but that someone could create such an interesting idea of reality and what causes reality, or maybe our embodiment of how we envision what God is, or where we could have possibly taken the concept of God from. Hickman is just, wow, it's I love it. This is the kind of science fiction I love. And then Moira is shocked. The world is ending tomorrow? It is. And we're all going to die? Almost everyone will die. The possible exception is you. You, I have arranged to send off planet. Why? Oh, I think you know why. From what I've gathered observing you, if you die before our Phalanx makes it to the nearest black hole, then all that I know will not become part of that dominion. And when you annihilate this timeline or reality, then you will be right back where you started. Knowing what you know without us knowing anything. And this is interesting here. If you can look, there was all in the shadows, there's this one little plant, and that plant, it looks very much like the Krakoan flowers that we're used to, right? I don't think that's accidental either. But if you live past my becoming God, then, existing beyond space and time, we will know you forever. And I think it very likely we would not tolerate something like you having any power over something like us. And then you can see, even though it's silhouetted here, you can see there's a sinister look. So that's, very much a sign of a villain. And I wanted to check something back here real quick. No, okay, it doesn't say what I thought. So Wolverine gets a little hostile at this. What kind of game you running, pal? It doesn't make any sense you telling us this. Why would you? Moira says, let him finish. It's a fair question, no. Why would I tell you? Why would I be conflicted? My problem is this. I question the wisdom of it. Becoming something that's really just an idea of existence, something immaterial, never touching someone again, never walking through the woods, never seeing the wonders I see with my post-human eyes. So I have faced a question. Do I let you die, and perhaps in the next life you can prevent our becoming part of the universal machine state? What I suspect might be a fake existence? Or do I send you away and find out for myself? Moira says, you want me to convince you? Yes. How would you prevent it? This whole scene here reminds me of the architect scene in Matrix Reloaded, which I loved. I crunched on that thing for 6 months on message boards, talking with fans, trying to dissect what the meaning of it was. I know some people think it's just gibberish, and just don't like those movies, and that's fine. But for me, I was loving every moment of this. One thing I wanted to point out, though, is that in this scene, when he talks about, you annihilating the timeline in reality, this confirms that Moira's resurrections don't create branching timelines, that the timeline that she's in ends, and she goes back essentially in time to restart it, and that reality, that timeline is erased. It did not happen, essentially. The only timeline that is reality is the final one. The only one that actually is real is the one where Moira doesn't resurrect, which is interesting, an interesting mutant power, because if she's natural evolution, she's always going to die eventually of old age or something, right? So time will never continue. It'll be a forever Groundhog Day. And why, if in the fiction of the X-Men, if this is the natural occurring evolution, why would nature evolve such a thing? Maybe I'm just getting too far down the rabbit hole there, but it makes me think. And this is one of the things I love about this book and this Jonathan's writing is it makes you think like this. So Wolverine is getting frustrated. Oh, I can answer this one. Maybe go back and start that revolution I promised a little sooner. Put a stop to post-humanity at the humanity part. And then the librarian explains what Homo Novissima is, the end of the evolutionary line. And he talks about how humanity, the post-humans were inevitable. That mutants were the natural evolution of humanity. Homo superior, it's adapting to situations, adapting to your life surroundings. It's nature, and it's not necessarily random, but it's organic. It's not planned or thought out. It's just, here's the situation you're in, and so life evolved you. Where he explains that post-humanity, it's like controlled. It's not evolution in that sense, or it's natural and organic, but artificial and controlled. So post-humans have delayed the war against mutants long enough, and that was the whole point of the machine war, was to buy them time. And they explained how the machines gave them decades. Like the Sentinels gave them years, Nimrod gave them decades. And then eventually, it says, when man controls the building blocks of biology and technology, evolution is no match for genetic engineering. What good was one mutant adapting to its environment when we could make 10 supermen? You thought it was the machines that would defeat you, but we just used them to buy time. Sentinels bought us years, Nimrod bought us decades. And Moira was just like, I never saw that. And he responds, and I guess you never will. After all, if you aren't capable of recognizing the real enemy you faced, how could you ever defeat them? Maybe this is just how it ends for you. And if you have no real alternative to offer, maybe this is my fate as well. Immortality, divinity, as I have no choice but to become a small part of God. And then thunk. Wolverine just boom. And this is the other great scene that I just absolutely loved. Holy shit. Jonathan, thank you so much for being the Wolverine that I love. Please, Benjamin Piercy, I'm sure you're not listening, but you're right. Please understand how to deliver Wolverine. I don't want just some thug with claws. I want... but you're like, Ash, this is a thug. No. This is Wolverine the badass. This isn't the guy who went around cucked under X-23, under Tom Taylor's run, where he just constantly was saying how good she was and how he was, No, this is the guy who for years I grew up reading was, I'm the best at what there is. I'm the best at what I do, and what I do isn't very pretty. That was Wolverine's slogan. They used to say it in the comics all the time. I haven't hardly ever heard. I have not seen or heard it since in a long time. But Wolverine was a badass. He was almost like the Batman of the Marvel universe. He just found ways, and he kills the librarian. Just wow, it's brutal. And then says this great line, "Dear Lord, up in robot heaven, tell me, was that fast enough for you?" And just like snicked his claws back in, and you're just like, damn, mic drop moment. And Moira's like, all this time we waited to find out why, and now we know. So, you gonna do something about it? Yes. Out come the claws again. All right, send me on my way. Close your eyes, Moira. No, my eyes are open, and they're gonna stay that way. Just make it quick. Don't worry, darling. This is what I do. And just, ooh. And so ended the 6th life of Moira X. Whoo, man. I've seen this before, and it still got me the same way. Jonathan Hickman, just, wow. Makes you care. Then we get the white pages and branching humanity. And this is where you have the Homo superior, Homo sapiens, and then Homo novissima. And it talks about post-humanity is a manufactured branch of humanity, not restricted by the normal evolutionary constraints. And it talks about this weird paradigm loop where post-humanity gives way to the machine state, the machine leap gives way to post-humanity, and da-da-da until one reaches the end, and it's Jonathan Hickman just making your head hurt. And then Charles, we'll go back to Charles. Just, he can't handle it. Now, I find it interesting. Look at the top left corner. We don't know what time this is. We can easily assume that this... Come on, dog. You got to make noise right now? We could easily assume that this is X1, and this is still... Or sorry, X0, and it's still on the park bench with Moira. Maybe that's what the writer wants you to think. But maybe it's not that. But we don't have anything confirming that. And whenever you have a writer like Hickman showing you something, and you look at it twice, you go, wait a second. I know this is what it looks like, but I don't have anything anchoring it. I don't have anything confirming what I'm seeing. So this could easily be a misdirection. Not that it's a lie, but that what you think you're seeing is not in the context that you think you're seeing it. What was that? How? It's a bit much, I agree. That it cuts at everything you believe, even more so. And so at this point you might say, oh, Ash, look, see, it is the park bench. But is it? I mean, it is the park bench for sure, but are we still looking at the same lifetime of Moira, right? Is this scene and the scene we just saw in the previous park bench scene, are those both in the same Moira lifetime? Or are they different Moira lives? That's the question that you can't be so sure, because Hickman has bounced around. He's told stories in the 9th time, which you didn't think, you thought you were still reading the 10th, and then it ended. You're like, that was the 9th life of Moira. And you're like, damn it, you got me. And then in that future time we just watched, we thought that's the future, but it was the future of the 6th life. And so she confronts Charles with hard truths, and the truths are that we always lose, she says, the mutants. And then Charles is like, perhaps we could do this, perhaps we can do that. And she kisses him, presumably because this is the man she loves, and she loves Charles this way. And she explains to us, the audience, essentially, through her dialogue, that she's going to have to break Charles. She says, you're a good man who believes in the goodness of others. And it breaks my heart that I have to break that part of you. but I will break it because that is what has to happen now. And so she's determined. Even her love for Charles won't stop her from doing what she's determined to do. I know you will fight me, just like your shade, Eric, will fight me. But this time, I mean for us, all of us, to be together. All of us. You've been dreaming the wrong dream, Charles. And then we get more of his journal. And it's interesting because we get some redacted stuff. In the first entry, she talks about it's taken months, but after allowing Charles Xavier to read my mind, I've recruited him in my cause. This part is important because she talks about she will not permit him to read her mind a second time. That unlike her, who has perfect recall because it's her memories, Charles won't have that because he just scanned her once. It's kind of like reading this comic series once. You'll be like, I think I understood what happened, but then you read it again and go, oh yeah, there's a lot more. But it's her motive that I question here. Why won't she let Charles? If everything is pure and she's doing, why not let's have Charles have, scan her 50 times, just take time over and over to dissect everything that happens? Why keep him out? Why hide things? That is not the sign of a hero, hiding things, right? It's a sign of person with motive. Now, that may not be illicitly evil motives or whatever, but that generally not 100% on the up and up. Then we get the blanked out entry. Then the next one, I have a choice to make. Up until now, I've been lying to myself about what I am and what I am not capable of. I believe that I could manipulate these men into doing what I needed them to do without any repercussions to myself. So she admits here clearly she's manipulating who I presume to be Charles and Eric. She says, I know now just how wrong I was. While we've become romantic, it's becoming clear that I am breaking Charles Xavier. And if I do break him, how will he become the man I need him to be in the coming days? My concern, my paramount fear is that if I fracture his psyche and eventually unleash something unexpected into the world. Ooh, that seems like a big foreshadowing moment of breaking Charles. Further alluding to Moira's puppet master behind the strings. Charles is not the man that we kind of know. She's kind of manipulated him. She has all sorts of tools at her disposal. Mr. Sinister, possibly doing weird DNA, gene splicing stuff, cloning, who knows. You've got Apocalypse that she's allied with in the past, doing who knows. There's all these pieces at play that could be doing this, and then unleashing something unexpected on the world. What could that possibly be? I don't know. The Shadow King? Maybe that's how the Shadow King comes into existence. Onslaught. Or something new that's fresh and unheard of. It seems pretty foreboding. Then we get to the next entry. I had a breakthrough with Charles today. For the first time, he had stopped trying to fight me on what humanity is and tapped into the potential windfall of knowledge that I represent regarding mutantdom. And this is where, it gets ideas of the resurrection, it seems like. And then this next entry, entry 22, seems even more important. This isn't the one yet, sorry. Charles and I have successfully recruited Magneto. It is with every meeting of ours, I am stunned at the casual arrogance of this man. If Charles is a rock that I have to wear down over decades, then Eric is something harder and less permeable. She talks about how loyalty with him is something that must be constantly earned, and he allows no deviation for intent, yada yada. One positive thing of note, I've successfully imprinted the idea of stronghold in his mind. So she's made this mark on him, but she's not sure he can be controlled, is what I get out of that. Then Apocalypse has made himself known to the world. Knowing him the way I do, and having aligned myself already with Xavier and Magneto, recruitment will not be an option until a much later date. He is in his raw primal state and sees the whole world as unfit, so much so that he will test everything to find something to build on. What must be done now is avoidance of an apocalypse event and the prevention of certain Omega-level mutants falling under his sway. We get to 35, Xavier, blocked out entry. But in this blocked out entry, we can see part of a text says, I am just as bad as the... And then We don't know. Entry 48. I have underestimated Xavier's infatuation with the possibilities of what can be accomplished by genetic material. This is where she expresses her dissatisfaction with Magneto and Xavier going to Sinister. They didn't talk to her first, and she thought it was stupid. And there's some interesting stuff into there. And then entry 52 is the big one. We have lost Magneto. I had hoped, given the opportunity, to help make him a better man. Instead, all we have made is an enemy. I am just as bad as they are, if not worse. This I find very interesting. First, I was like, oh, what's this I'm just as bad admittance? Moira is admitting she's bad, but then she admits the same thing, the same exact line. I am just as bad as they are, if not worse. I'm assuming this line up here is much the same with maybe a few extra words. This entry is Magneto. This entry is Xavier. What happened with Xavier that could be as bad as Magneto? Did she possibly lose Xavier as well and had to do something to bring him under control? Is that why the Xavier that we have now feels like not the Xavier that fans know and love? I don't know, but it's blacked out for a reason, so it's definitely a secret that Hickman doesn't want us to know about until he's got the right time to reveal it. And then the last one, she talks about she needs to remove herself from the world. There's interesting. Charles and I will use a Shi'ar golem, a living husk, to test our early theories on what can be accomplished with adequate and properly prepared genetic material and a backup copy from Cerebro. It just says, we'll fake up my death as a replica and I will return to the shadows where I belong. So there's two things here. This Shi'ar golem could be the replica that she talks about, so it's faking her death. I think the Shi'ar golem might be the white Magneto that we see, because he says Magneto's lost, but we turned the page yesterday at Krakoa. Moira's no space. Boom! There's Magneto. Or is that the Shi'ar husk? I thought we lost Magneto, but why is he standing there? So they talk, and the big thing here is they're having a meeting, and Moira's been out of it. She's isolated herself from the world, and so she's just making, it's like, oh, okay, so I can assume now we have a government. Charles is filling her in. Yes, we have a quiet council. Blobbity, blobbity, blobbity. The Red King hasn't been announced yet. It seems like it's pretty much certain it's going to be Kitty Pryde. Why it's Red King, I don't know. Probably just to keep people guessing. And he explains who everyone is and why they sat people with who they sat. And then they talk about Mystique would not agree without certain guarantees. Moira says, what did you do? Charles responds, sipping tea casually. We promised to bring Destiny back. You cannot do that. We know. There could be no precogs on Krakoa. We will not tolerate mutants who can see the future. We know. You don't understand. She has ways of seeing me, and I am a weakness because my death ends all of this. We know. Do you? What happens if we bring her back and she tells everyone what she sees? What if she tells everyone the truth? This whole page here, this whole scene, is not a scene of heroes. This is a scene of people with ulterior motives who are doing things for themselves. You can call it survival if you will. But look, certain mutants apparently are not allowed to survive with the rest of the mutants. This is the problem with whenever you break down into fascist societies, when you break down into hyper-liberal collectivisms, like the X-Men are demonstrating here. It never is a utopia. It's always a breakdown. There are always going to be people who don't fit in. And when you've broken through the principles that Charles has always been a man of, look, I'm not here to propagate and be a mutant supremacist. I'm here to join everyone. We're all humans. Mutants are just humans as well. They're humans with an extra, an evolutionary jump, but they're not a completely different species, right? We see evolution in reality, right? There are people who do not get wisdom teeth. That's an evolutionary jump. There's people, I believe, who aren't born with an appendix, right? That doesn't make you a mutant and all of a sudden you're not a human. You're still a human. Most of the mutants in the world don't have crazy powers like the X-Men do. They might have some minor little thing, like they have 6 fingers instead of 5, right? They're still human. At their heart, in their brain, in their psyche, we're all people. And this was Charles' dream, was just all belonging like people. And if you want to bring in the civil rights movement, because lots of people go, the X-Men are if you want to do that, fine. Then Charles is Martin Luther King Jr. He's got a dream, right? Magneto is Malcolm X. It's not a perfect analog, but if you want to take that side and you want to see it that way, fine. This is not the Martin Luther King guy anymore. This is not the guy who wants everyone to love and get along and be judged on the merit of their character. This is a woman who's hiding something and saying, you know what? In our new future of mutant supremacy, even certain mutants will not be allowed. That is a signal of a problem. And I know there's some people listening to my videos are going to go, oh, God, Ash, you don't know what you're talking about. You've never been oppressed, blah, 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 blah. All right. Moira, we know. And we'll put her off as long as we can. Tomorrow, not today, all the mutant leaders say. We'll put all of them off, but one day they deserve to know the truth, just like Charles and I did. You really want them to know that we always lose? The truth is that until now, we have always lost, but this time is going to be different, for we are different. Now, you might be hearing my little rant a second ago and then going to this page and seeing like, see, Ash, it's not as bad as you thought. This is really innocuous. She just doesn't want them to know that they always lose. That's the whole thing. Yeah, except look at this scene here with Charles and Xavier, and that is all because of you. Big celebration, and there's no denying what you've done, Moira. You shaped us into this. You made us into this. We are the perfect tools for an imperfect age. And you should celebrate what you have done. And everyone's like, yay, for you have done well. And everyone is celebrating their new utopia. Except for Apocalypse over here. Looks a little bit solemn. He's got maybe other ideas. Something's not right. But now it's time for you to step aside and let us do the good work for which we were created. And they're standing high on a peak, elevated, and being celebrated, and just look what we have made. And yet the thought lingers, is it enough? This is only a start, Eric, but we have to hope so. And if it is not, then we do more. Whatever the cost, whatever it takes. This is all there is, Eric. We live and die with this, you and I. Then I will die for it. And if I fall, then you will raise me up. I will show this world what a real mutant is. Keep talking like that, and you're sure to elicit a response, says Charles with a smile. I am not ashamed of what I am. Let them try to stop us this time. And everyone's like, yay! Charles says, yes, let them try. And I got to tell you, when you look at the X-Men like the rebels in Star Wars, which these scenes are very evocative, right, of the celebration at Endor and Return of the Jedi. It's very easy to be like, yes, we're with these guys and they're fighting the good fight against the evil oppressors. But then you look at some of their tactics and some of how they operate shady behind the doors. I never saw Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and Princess Leia operating behind closed doors and going, rubbing their fingers and having little smiles and like, we can't tell people the truth of what we're really doing. No. The people in the right don't fear transparency. So, again, I'm not judging the X-Men here and putting them and saying you're all criminals. What I'm saying simply is that Hickman's got a bigger thing going on, and something is still not completely right. I don't buy actually that the X-Men are all villains. In fact, I'm loving Wolverine because Wolverine seems to be this sort of like anchor point of morality and integrity that he does not let. No, in any timeline you see, you don't see Wolverine ever diverge and just be like, yeah, that's, he's just like, no, this is how it is. And he calls a spade a spade. And I really like that. It helps me have a way of calibrating my thoughts. And I'm like, am I just reading this wrong? And Wolverine is that thing that you can sort of, set your gauge to, like I said, calibrate your feelings. I don't know what to think. And I think that's the whole point of what Hickman's trying to do here. He's trying to give you a good story about characters you love and they're fighting for something and you want to cheer them on. And in parts I am. But in doing so, you've got this weird kind of feeling in the back of your head that you're like, something's amiss. And that's great. That is great. I'm not here to judge the X-Men. I'm not here to lambast it and just be like, this is shit and this is progressive. I'm not at all. I don't think that way. My alarm's going off. I don't think that way at all. But I do think something's amiss. And hopefully you kind of understand what I'm talking about. I know you're not going to necessarily have the same subjective reaction as I do. I've been really enjoying listening to other people talk. I've been watching other people's videos. I like reading your guys' comments, if you have any. Talking to people on Discord and on Twitter. This has been a fantastic book. It sparked so many conversations, so much theory, crafting, and by all means, please join in on that. I want to know what you think. A lot of what I think has been formulated by talking to you guys and other people, and just, you saw it. I didn't see it that way. That's a great way to put it. Like, for example, my boy Stacks, the real comic book Stacks. I originally took this as this whole scene differently with Apocalypse, and he kind of pointed out his take that Apocalypse wasn't really content. I had said like, it looks like Apocalypse is content. He finally got, but he's not. And I was like, oh yes, you opened my eyes, and now I see it totally different. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate every single view. Hopefully, I'm sure this is probably way too long, but this is a chunky book to talk about, and I wanted to talk about all of it. I am not ashamed of what I am, Magneto. So here are the final books that you're going to get. This is Dawn of X, all these number ones. Again, still buying weekly books. Don't forget, you got to buy weekly books. Dawn of X. Oh, look it down here. Araco. Very interesting. Didn't catch that before. One World of Mutants. And at the end, it just has these things, and they just talk about next. This one says Men, it says X-Men. And then this one says Marauders, Excalibur, X-Force, New Mutants, and Fallen Angels. That's what those say, in case you cared. So I appreciate everyone who's watched this video, who's listened. If you've made it this far, you're a trooper. I know I can blab. I have the gift of being long-winded. That's me. Thanks for watching Ashton Comics. I'll see you next time. Have a great day.